Welcome to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show on 94.7 The Pulse. Music, interviews, news, and, well, Two Blokes Chatting. Now, here are the two blokes.
It is 5 minutes past 10 o'clock. Normally, when we have a guest, we introduce them and then we say hello to them. But this morning, Mike Rudd, we're going to say Heidi ho to you. Welcome to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show. Oh, hang on, I'll do that now. We can hear you. Do that.
Oh, yes, it's wonderful to be here.
So thanks for joining us. Now that you've been on more than once, it does officially make you a friend of the show. So congratulations on the elevation to that position.
I can feel the warmth.
That just might be the temperature outside coming up. We originally arranged to have a chat to you because you were going to be coming down this way to play in a gig next Saturday night, which has now sadly been postponed. So we're going to talk to you about life as a muso, and COVID and all that kind of stuff. But we also want to touch on a couple of other things as well. So tell us how things have been going with Spectrum and the Indelible Mertseps and all that since we last spoke.
Well, the Indelible Mertseps is an actual thing now because when we last spoke, I had other creations, but the actual Indelible Mertseps concept languished in the closet still for some time now, of course, decades. And it was invited out again to join Nodal Lake and Spectrum at last week's episode of the Caravan Club in Archies Creek, which celebrated the 50th anniversary of the first Sunbury Festival.
Yes, and that was one of the things we're going to talk to you about shortly. But Rob's just written down Mertseps on a bit of paper to work out where on earth that word comes from. Tell us where the Indelible Mertseps came. Obviously, you might want to tell where the name came from, but also why they were an incarnation in the first place.
Well, I think drilling down, as we now say.
Oh yes, absolutely, nicely done.
I think. Inherent in my music is a kind of Lennon-McCartney opposition of styles, whereas Lennon was sort of pure rock and roll. McCartney had the whole rest of the realm of music to play with in his mind, and I sort of had that kind of incompatible thing lurking around in my mind. So it was kind of easy to split them into long, provocative, perhaps songs. And then the short, concise, provocative songs as well. So yes, and of course, Spectrum is Mertseps backwards,
which is a totally different way to how it's normally expressed. Because people normally say Mertseps is Spectrum backwards.
Indeed, I just thought I'd try the other way.
Yeah, and notice that we picked up on it. That's the impressive part.
Well done, you guys. You're alert.
Mike, you have completed a hat trick of Australian rock and roll royalty on the show. The last 3 weeks we've done a guy named Glenn Shorrock. He was followed by Brian Cadd and then your good self. And we old blokes, and when I say old, I'm in my 60s.
I'm not.
The fact that you are all still working, but occasionally working together in these little connections that you have, and there's a lot of you come together at different times. It's fantastic. It must be fantastic for you, to be keeping working and relevant. But for we, the listener, it's just great to have all that great music that we grew up with still very much alive.
Yes, well, in the day, of course, we very rarely socialised. Well, I very rarely socialised with anybody, but with other bands, we would occasionally play with them on the same bill, but because things were so hectic and busy, we didn't socialise, and it was, I think, Sunbury that kind of brought us together for the first time, and then later on, a long way to the top, where we actually were able to relax a bit with each other and find out about each other and find out that although we were competitors, it was a very competitive thing early on. But as you get older, you go, what the hell?
Yeah.
What are we doing that for? And finding out about these people, and not that much different. And some of them are, but it doesn't matter. It's just, we didn't really think of socialising in the early days because it was so competitive.
And then, of course, I guess as you got older, this incredible respect for each other's work.
Yes, well, occasionally incredible, but certainly respect.
Because I guess the other thing too, we often associate, the so-called front person of the band. In your case, obviously with Spectrum, you're the most recognisable member of that. Glenn being, someone out the front of Little River Band. There's a whole lot of people doing stuff in the background, isn't there? That drummers and bass players and so on, who I guess cross-pollinate between these groups and create some of those relationships.
Yeah, look, that's right. Although with what we miss now with music and bands and so forth is, excuse me, is that with bands like Spectrum, for instance, in those days, the music wasn't just a product of one person. I mean, I would come up with a basic idea, but the band would work it over. So the song actually reflected the contributions from each of the players. They weren't playing as session players, they were playing as somebody kind of really interested in the music, and that's why the music sort of came out that way. I don't think it happens that way these days. Well, in those days, it was a reaction against the formulaic pop music that we grew up with, because that music was played by experts, and I mean, there's been a lot of publicity for the bands and the band members now that in those days played sessions 100% of the time, and they played for all sorts of unlikely people, and they were really adaptable. But with a band like Spectrum, we only played one way, so it all came out sounding like Spectrum.
The early days Countdown was a great vehicle for Australian rock bands to get their name out, get their music out, and it was highly successful. The years went on, and you've gone past your best. I'm enjoying the shows like Rock Quiz is probably the best one to get a bit of review of past days. You've been on that. We're going to be featuring that very, very shortly, but it's still going on, I do tell, and coming to Geelong, I think in April. I get to interview Brian Nankervis occasionally, and I'm pretty sure he's got April on at Costa Hall for a Rock Quiz session. You enjoyed your little front on that?
Yes, I did, and I thought my Rock Quiz days were over, but I've just received an invitation to consider appearing maybe even in April. I'm not sure. I've forgotten. But yes, another invitation to appear on the show, which I kind of look at and I go, well, yeah, that's okay, but then I've got to sing a song, which means I have to learn the lyrics. Oh, my God.
Yes, and buy a new jacket.
No, I'm going to use the same one. It only comes out for Rock Quiz.
I do recall talking to you just leading up to that, and you were very proud of that white jacket that you had been out and purchased. And
I spent a whop cacker on that.
That's a technical expression for those listening. That means quite a lot of money. Yes, and that particular version of Crying, which we will use as our outro to this conversation with Jess Cornelius, was just one of the best duets that we've seen on Rock Quiz. And I'm not saying that because you're on the phone. I actually genuinely believe that.
It was damn good. I can concur.
Oh, good. Well, that's 100%. That's good. And no, look, I thoroughly enjoyed the whole episode, and thankfully people don't ask me to sing it again, because each of the times we rehearsed that, I sang a different way, and I didn't know what I was going to end up with. I was sort of winging it in a big way, but Jess was fantastic, and I thoroughly enjoyed the experience.
I'm fascinated by that process, though. So you get told by Rock Quiz they'd like you to be on there, and Jess Cornelius is going to be the other person, and we'd really like you to sing a song together at the end. How do you choose the song, and how much time have you got to rehearse?
Well, we both came up with ideas, but Jess trumped me with crying, so that was easy.
Yep.
And I got together with her once, I think, to rehearse it, and then it was all in the context of the day. So I guess we went through it 2 or 3 times on the set altogether. And as I said, it was a moving piece of art for me. So I didn't know what I was going to end up with, but it was great fun.
Just on that too, how much did you know about Jess Cornelius pre-show, and how much did she know about you? Because there was a little bit of a gap in age. Yes, it's almost prosecutable. I knew nothing about her, and presumably she knew nothing about me. That's that kind of generational thing, and both being into music of different styles and so forth. So yeah, that was it was a meeting of generations. It's great.
But I think I'm right in saying she's a Kiwi, isn't she?
Yes. Well, that's you have to be Kiwi to be on Questions, you know.
It was it's the quota. Let's have a couple of New Zealanders on. They've done a bit.
Oh, yes. Definitely.
Yeah. So a couple of things that we did want to have a chat to you about, because we can't chat to you about Ocean Grove next Saturday night anymore, but we will be keen to hear when you have that reschedule. We'll certainly either give it a pump up here on the show or have another chat to you if you want to. But the Sunbury Pop Festival, you did refer to it earlier. It is the 50th anniversary. We spoke to Brian Cadd last week, and he spoke of Ginger Man and how important that particular festival was in helping him in terms of getting his solo career going a bit more. And you think of Thorpe singing Most People I Know Think That I'm Crazy. It must have been quite an extraordinary event to be part of.
I think, yes, obviously the first one was fantastic. It was a bit like Long Way to the Top. The first few shows of that, everybody was in a state of wonder, because at that stage it was hugely speculative and nobody knew whether anybody was going to, in Sunbury's case, wander over the hill and go, oh, here we are, Jackson's Creek, jump in. And everybody was kind of on the same deal. So it was a hugely sort of democratic feel about the whole thing. And Billy Thorpe was actually, he and Lobby were actually playing well before the Madder Lake took the stage and actually opened the show. And they kind of summed up the feeling that it was a kind of music rules feeling. It was very Woodstock. As I say, the Woodstock as we saw it in the movie. I was really inspired by that movie. I was kind of feeling jaded at that point, 27-year-old jaded person, and I saw Woodstock, and I thought, wow, that's fantastic, and it was very much that kind of feeling at the start of Sunbury.
Because I think, I'm a little younger than you, Mike, and so I would have been, 10 when that happened, and I can remember my parents' generation going, druggies, go out and be some great orgy thing going on out at Sunbury, and I think for some people who were in my specific, let's say the people who were between 5 and 14 at that time, it might have been seen as being some kind of weirdo festival, but it really had such an important role to play in Australian music, didn't it?
Yes, it did, because we never really considered that we would be able to put a festival together using, purely Australian acts, and that was the case up in, the first couple were exactly that, and then they started opening the doors for international acts as well, and I don't think that killed it or anything. I think that a balance might have been sustained had the following, the last year not been such a disaster.
Mike, getting back to what we were talking about earlier about you getting together with your opposition bands, would that have been one of the first times when you genuinely had a chance to share in each other's music talents, but also just sit down and have a chat and a beer over what you do?
Well, in our case, not, because now I don't remember if it was the first or second, but typically we arrived from Sydney that sort of on the day. Our road crew just scraped in, and then we had a gig that night at Bertie's or something. And so we didn't really hang around the festival too long. And so that camaraderie, although it was there, we didn't really partake a lot of that. But we did get to hear other people and speak to them and so forth. But it wasn't as laid back as we might have liked.
And my understanding was it was hot. I had a conversation, I was fortunate enough to talk to Graham Goebel a number of years ago, and he was out there as the lead of Mississippi, and they had just had that outstanding piece of music released called Kings of the World, which needed a string group behind, which you can find online, you can see it on YouTube. And they spent the entire previous hour retuning the violins because they kept on slipping out of tune.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't be surprised. I mean, and I mean, that brings to mind the Rolling Stones at Kooyong Stadium. That was hot too, and a lot of tuning going to waste with Keith Richards strings.
Well, the funny thing, if you go back and find that film clip of Graham singing at Sunbury, you'll see that the string instruments are all being played by fellows who are probably, in their 40s. They're really old, and they're wearing a shirt and tie.
Yeah.
And you think they must have been sweating it out.
Mike, please just go over the scientificness of heat and strings getting out of tune.
Oh, yeah. Well, yes. You should really... Optimum conditions are no heat, no cold, just sort of a pleasant temperature. It's like preserving a piece of art. You have to have exactly the right conditions, and they don't like air conditioning for exactly the same reason. If the strings get cold, then steel strings will sharpen. Not evenly, mind you, and then the other, if it gets hot, they slacken off, just like a steel bridge would or something, except on a tiny scale.
So you could potentially lose an octave in strings in half an hour of 40 degrees.
No, you'd lose a significant amount.
Yeah.
And then if you mix up steel and nylon strings, they go the opposite way. So.
Oh dear!
It can be fairly radical.
It's a bit like the old days of the Walkman when the batteries started to go, and you're listening to Cliff Richard saying, "We don't talk anymore."
That's right. Bring back those days.
Yeah, that's it. So the other sad piece of news during the week, and I'm not sure how close you worked with him, but the passing of Glenn Wheatley, who is a massive name in music for both as a musician with the Masters, of course, but also as a promoter and a manager.
Yeah, well, I barely knew Glenn. I did meet him a few times, and I found him a very affable, personable guy. He was a bass player, of course, and like Bill Wyman, took great notice of what the band was earning and so forth. I think that was I think if you have one guy in the band that takes notice of income, then the band will last longer than 6 months. So it's like owning the PA or something. You're guaranteed of a place in a band.
Yeah. And I think, we obviously, he had some unfortunate media in his latter years in terms of some charges that were brought against him. But I think if you look at some of the key things he's done, I mean, the Masters Apprentices were the biggest band, certainly in Melbourne, probably in Australia in the late 1960s, and he was an integral part of that.
Yes.
And then, of course... Sorry, go on.
As soon as he noticed he had only 4 strings, he thought... there's something wrong here. Everybody else has got 6 strings. I've only got 4. That started his career.
And then, of course, as you say, he got into the management area to pick up on some of the stuff that's going on in the band. But then, of course, he was a massive part of the success overseas of Little River Band and the re-emergence of John Farnham as a solo artist.
Yeah, well, he had the insider's knowledge of being a musician and used that, and a generous personality as well. So he got on well with people, he had a vision, and he had enough nous about money to make it all work, and that puts him above a lot of management and agents.
Just on that, Mike, being a bean counter in a band, do you get paid less for only strumming 4 strings instead of 6?
Exactly. I think that was the first thing that occurred to him. I've been shortchanged there. Are we being shortchanged everywhere? And of course, in those days, it was very fast and loose. I mean, nobody knew anything about anything, and there were people just walking away with loads of money, and it's not the musicians. So there was a lot of ground to catch up on, and I'm sure that he was one of the guys that kind of brought it together.
I heard someone during the week referring to him as being a bit of the Kerry Packer of the music system. You know, back in the old days in the 70s, no cricketer ever got paid. It all went to the powers that be, and you know, that he brought in the opportunity for cricketers to be financially compensated, and maybe Glenn had that similar sort of role.
Oh, look, I think so. As I say, the promoters in those days paid you an amount. It had nothing to do with how many people were there and how much they'd paid. So he was one of the guys that changed that.
Famously, I think Ken Brodziak, paid the Beatles $500 each or something to come to Australia in 1964, something like that.
He had a deal, so he was very lucky that deal. In the meantime, they became famous. So, and they went with the deal. I mean, I don't think it was Ken's choice. He probably would have paid more had they demanded it, but they didn't.
Yeah, I think that happened in Adelaide when they added the show. So getting back to the work of Mike Rudd and his friends Brock, Darryl and Robbo, amongst others, you are getting around a bit, and obviously there is quite a bit of interaction with the guys from Madder Lake as well. How's that looking in terms of the year ahead, given you've been hit by COVID for the last 12, 18, 2 years?
Well, it's still erratic, and we've been booked for Byron at the Blues Fest, and that's looking solid at the moment. But everything can change within a few days. So let's hope that the gigs that are sort of settling in remain there. We've been working with Madder Lake, as you so rightly say, and one of the good things that happened as a result of that was that we now have Brendan playing as a permanent Spectrum member.
Great.
And which is very convenient when we're on the same show. But it's hard work for him, of course, because he's got to work with 2 bands. But it's worked out really well, and the association with Madder Lake has been one of the saving graces, even though, as you say, it hasn't all come off. We're still projecting double bill, as we call them, shows throughout this year, and hopefully they'll keep on going.
Mike, when we talked to Brian Cadd last week, he was sitting on the deck at a friend's house in Gympie, and he was trying to find a word that rhymed with Gympie because he was writing a song about his experience. Do you still have those moments where things are right and you've got a guitar or a piano is your choice and still punch out a tune?
Wimpy.
Wimpy was all we could find, but Neil's come up with something.
I came up with Skimpy, and I don't know why his mind went to Wimpy and I went to Skimpy. You can work it out.
Okay, no, it's good. Well, they both will work in that song.
Yeah. We even stretched it to Pimply at one stage to decide that didn't work.
I know, you can stretch it, but look, I still find the lyric writing the hardest part. If I was to come up with lyrics first, I'd be wrapped, because the tune part is easy, but I find the lyric part is taxing, and I need somebody to prod me to say, write a specific song these days before one will actually emerge. I've got heaps of bits of songs sitting around waiting to be completed. So I actually spoke with Eris O'Brien, who worked with Ross Wilson over a long period of time, and he's a wonderful lyric writer. He's a dream. And actually, a few years ago, it's quite a few years ago now, probably a decade ago, he came over to my place, and we wrote a song together. I had the basic premise for the song there, but he just sat in the corner and did what a good lyric writer does, and wrote some killer lyrics. And I just heard from him a couple of days ago, and he's sorting through his rep. He said, "What have you done with that song?" And I said, "Well, nothing, but I will now because you've asked me."
Mike, I don't know what you're like in mathematical probabilities, but music's been written by a lot of people for a long period of time. Are we at the stage where every possible combination of notes has been reached? Because there's a lot of people into it.
Well and truly. I think there are only 12 actually available, so then you have to start looking at other scales to find new melodies. No, everything's been done, but there's ways of relating those notes to the current generation. It's all very morbid at the moment, but yes, there's still, you can still put things together and look at things in a fresh way. It'll never end. It's endless.
And your passion to do that still exists. I think that was the point of my question. You're obviously in your 70s and still doing what you did when you were 17.
Yes, I'm still a lazy old bugger. I'm still busy and nothing's happening.
Well, we were all primed to come down to the Piping Hot Chicken Shop and say good day next Saturday night, but that's not happening. Your next gig as Spectrum is at the Oakley RSL. Boy, there's been some great events held at the Oakley RSL over the journey, hasn't there? Remember that one that we had for Harvey James?
Look, it's a wonderful room. I haven't been there for a while, but I believe they've made a few changes there. But it'll basically be the Caravan Club as it was in those days, and it'll be fabulous.
In a mildly amusing yet quite solemn activity, I was there one event, and the music event started like at 5 o'clock or whatever, and it went through into the evening. And all of a sudden, in the middle of a song, they stopped and did the Stand To.
Yes, yes.
Where the whole place just goes quiet and do a minute's silence for those lost.
Yes, I think that still will happen because there's a rigid RSL.
Yeah, and then they pick up the song at the same spot.
Yeah.
It's like you've hit the pause button. Now you're there with Chris Stockley's Bram. Tickets, get a go at this, Rob. $35 for 3 hours of music. That is just absurd. So get down there, folks. Spectrum playing at the Oakley RSL with Chris Stockley's Bram. Where else can people go to find out other gigs that you might have, Mike?
Good question, Neil.
Thank you.
I have a website, MikeRuddBillPutt.com. I still honour Bill in a few things, and that's one of them. So MikeRuddBillPutt.com will find gig guides and other useless pieces of information about Spectrum, Aerial, or whatever.
Yeah, excellent. Now, of course, Bill being your long-time collaborator and bass player who we sadly lost, 11 years ago now?
Yeah, 2013. That's
so it's 9 years, yeah, okay. And so it's Mike, M-I-K-E, Rudd, R-U-D-D, Bill, B-I-L-L, Putt, P-U-T-T.com.
Yes, that's the one.
And we'll look forward to catching up with you at a gig, if not down in this neck of the woods, somewhere up near Melbourne.
And I'm hoping that the Rock Quiz crew will get your white jacket to Geelong. Mike, that would be fantastic.
Wouldn't it, though? I'm looking forward to reacquainting myself. There'll be moths flying out.
Just check the back that there's no hole in it. That could be awkward when you do that spin, halfway through your act.
I can see through that guy.
Mike, it is always great fun to have a chat to you, and we look forward to catching up with you at some stage in person. But in the meantime, folks, MikeRuddBillPutt.com. Thanks for joining us on the Two Blokes Chatting radio show.
Thanks, Neil and Rob.